So now that our Mongo database is up and running, let's set up our Express application to connect to our Mongo database. And when it comes to interacting with our Mongo database, we're going to use a library called Mongoose. So it's going to make it a little bit easier to talk to our Mongo database. And so here, if we pull up the documentation for Mongoose, we can see to install it, we just do npm install mongoose. So let's do that right now. All right, and so once that's done, first of all, we installed a new package. So we have to tear everything down. Remember, no more -v because we have our database. So let's do down. And then let's do an up again. And we want a -- build. All right, and now going back to the documentation, the first thing we have to do is we have to import Mongoose. So let's copy that line. We'll paste that in there. And then we have to connect to our database. So here we just call the mongoose.connect method. And then we have to pass in our URL as well as some config options. And so the full URL, if you pull up the actual Mongoose documentation, it's going to look something like this. We do MongoDB, and then :// then your username, your password, the IP address of the host, the port, and then some options as well. So under here, we'll do mongoose.connect, MongoDB, // and then here you pass in your username. So mine's Sanjeev, and then the password's going to be my password and then here we have to give the IP address, right? And so this is probably where most of you guys are going to get stuck because we have to figure out, what is our IP address? How does IP addressing work with Docker containers? Well, here's the thing, Docker makes it really easy to work with containers and it automatically assigns your containers an IP address. So if you ever want to figure out what the IP address of a container is, first of all, do a Docker PS, get all your Docker containers that are running, and then here you can do a Docker network, Docker inspect. So this is going to give us more detailed information about a container, and we can grab our container name. So here I'm just going to grab our Node app first, just to take a look. And so here you're going to get a ton of information. And if we go all the way to the top, let's take a look at what's up there. A lot of random information that we don't really care about. And I believe what we're interested in is going to be all the way at the bottom. So let's scroll on down to the bottom. And here there's a section called network settings. So this is probably where we want to look. And so if we keep going down, you can see there's something called networks. And so there's a concept within Docker called networks where you can create more than one network and then put different containers within those networks so that only the containers within a network can talk to one another and they can't talk to containers in other networks. So it looks like there's a container called node docker _default. So, this represents our directory name. So this looks like it was created by Docker Compose, and it actually was. So Docker Compose does create a brand new network just for your application so that all of the containers and services within your Docker Compose file will get placed into that network. And you'll see here, we have an IP address. So this is the IP address of our Node application. And then here you can see its default gateway. And so we want to grab the IP address of our Mongo container. So let's do the same thing for our Mongo container. And let's do a Docker inspect and then grab the name of our Mongo container. Once again, it's using that same exact network that was created. And we can see here, this is the 172.25.0.2. So this is the IP address. And I'm just going to copy that. We can paste it in here. And then we want to put the port that's going to run on, that Mongo's running on. So it's going to be running on the default port as long as you didn't change any of the default configs. So 27017. And then we're going to pass this one property auth source equals admin. All right, let's save that. And then here we're going to call .then. So here we're going to pass in an error function, and we're just going to say if we successfully connect to our database, I just want to do a console.log, and we'll just say successfully connected to database. And if this failed, we'll just do a .catch. And we'll say, first of all, we'll pass in the error. And we'll just console.log error. All right, let's save that and let's see what happens. So if we do a Docker PS, and then we're going to do a Docker logs, and we'll connect to that node application. So here we can see that it said successfully connected to database. So it looks like we've successfully connected to the database and everything's working. However, there's something I don't like, right? Right now, we had to go into Docker inspect to get the IP address of our container and then put it into our code. However, if we stop and start our containers, or if we do a Docker compose down and then back up, right? First of all, there's no guarantee that we get the same IP address. And even if we could guarantee the same exact IP address, the first time we run it, we'd have to go in, we'd have to get the IP address and then update our code. And that's just a really sloppy way of doing things. And so Docker actually has a nice feature that allows us to make it easy to talk between containers, right? And this feature only exists when it comes to custom networks that get created. So if I do a Docker network ls, you'll see there's a couple of networks that we have. We've got the bridge and host network. So these are the two default networks that come bundled with Docker. And then I've got a couple other ones. You may not have these, but you'll see that we have one for our node Docker default. So this is the one Docker Compose created. This is the custom one that created just for our application. And when you have a custom network, this only happens with the custom networks, the ones that you create, and not one of the two default ones. When you have a custom network, we have DNS. So when one Docker container wants to talk to another Docker container, we can use the name of that container or the name of that service to talk to that container. And so if we go back to our docker-compose file, you'll see that the service for my Node app is called Node app, and the service for my Mongo container is called Mongo. So I can refer to this container's IP address based off of this service name. So if I call Mongo within my Node app, it's going to automatically grab the IP address of our Mongo container. So if I go back to our index.js, I can change this to Mongo. And then here, if we do a Docker logs, and let me just do a pass in a -f. I think it's -f for follow. Actually, let me just do a help real quick. Yeah, -f follow. And then here, if I save this, you can see we still successfully connected to the database. So because of DNS, we're able to resolve this name, this host name, to be whatever our Mongo container is. And just to show you guys exactly how that works, let's actually log into my Node application container. So if I do docker exec, actually first of all, do docker ps, and we'll do docker exec -it. And then here we'll drop into bash. Let's ping Mongo. Let's see what happens. Look at that, right? It automatically uses DNS to resolve the name of Mongo, and it got the IP address of 172.25.0.2, which is our Mongo container. So that's how this whole DNS process works. So anytime you want one of your containers to talk to another container, all you have to do is refer to its service name, and it'll automatically be able to resolve it because DNS is built into Docker. And keep in mind, this is only applicable to networks that you create. It does not work with the default bridged network, okay? And if you want to take a look at your networks, we can actually do a Docker. First of all, we'll do a Docker network ls, and we can do a Docker network inspect. Well, first of all, I have to grab the specific network I want. So the one that's specifically my Docker Compose created, and then we can do inspect. And I messed up the order. Sorry about that. It's going to give us some more information about this specific network. So you can see here the subnet that all of our containers are going to use the 172.25/16. We can see what the default gateway is. And then we can see under the container section all of the containers we have. So we've got our Mongo container, and we can see the IP address as well as the MAC address of this container. And then we can also see the container for our Node application. And so this has also got an IP address and a MAC address. And I believe, and don't quote me on this, but it looks like, yeah, actually that's all I wanted to show you guys from here. So I think that's going to wrap up this network section. So in the next section, we're going to make a few changes to our application so that it's a little bit easier to work with environment variables, and we can kind of store them all in this same area and section.